Hi, and welcome to this episode of Ask Amy. Thanks so much for joining us today. Our guest is Sarah Guidry. She's the Executive Director of the Earl Carl Institute. Thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to cover a wide variety of topics, and you're sort of an expert at all of them with your work with the Earl Carl Institute under the Thurgood Marshall School of Law. We want you to know that we're talking about your legal rights, as you might imagine, since you're at TSU's Thurgood Marshall School of Law. Everything from civil issues, questions that we get a lot in the classroom, what parents' and students' rights are, to property rights, and sort of making sure that the property, the house maybe that you've lived in for decades, generations of your family, that you've done everything you need to do to protect that property and keep it in your family. First, for people who are tuning in and they've never heard of the Earl Carl Institute for Legal and Social Policy, what is it? What do you do?
Well, the Earl Carl Institute at Texas Southern University is a research and writing and legal think tank. We provide representation to individuals as well as undertake policy research and advocacy to create systemic change for generally disenfranchised and traditionally underserved populations in the Houston-Harris County area.
Important work. You guys are working with real people in our community who are asking you all for help, like mostly representation when they don't really know how to handle or they can't hire an attorney for situations, right?
Exactly.
So how did it start? I mean, the Earl Carl Institute began in the 90s?
Yes. The Institute was founded in 1992 by Professor Marsh Johnson, supported by, at the time, Dean James Douglas. And the Institute originally was formed to help support students in improving their writing skills, their research and writing skills. Over the years, the Institute developed into an advocacy program and then began legal clinics that have increased to the point today that we're doing representation in a variety of areas and legal subject matters.
Yeah, I was telling you that I heard about the Institute from a consumer who reached out to me for help on a solar panel issue, but in the whole process explained, our attorney that I spoke with over at TSU, and he was providing all of this, knowledge, helpful information that I had never heard about. And I'm like, wait, who is this person over at TSU? And so that's how I found out about the work that you all are doing. And it sounds amazing. I mean, just a place for people to go who don't have the knowledge. Let's start. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the background. One question that we hear from people quite often that I don't always have the answers for them are school-related issues, right?
Right.
And one, your child gets called into the office at school, they got in trouble, you don't necessarily think what happened was fair, or you hear that maybe another student was just as much at fault for some sort of altercation. And when I get these calls, Sarah, I have to tell you, I'm usually like, well, the school's not going to be giving us information because they're dealing with juveniles and minors, and you feel like, well, what can you do? You provided this whole sort of tip sheet, like this brochure on what parents need to know about your kids when they get in trouble at school or get called in, because students have rights?
Yes, students have rights. And sometimes parents don't think that students have rights if they actually did something at school. And I'll tell you, I remember a few years ago going to court, and it was a progressive judge, so he allowed us to be there on site for any parent to talk to us and get legal representation at the time of the hearing.
Oh.
And so when he announced we were there, none of the parents came for help. So I asked, could I just announce to the parents that just because your child did what their school is alleging does not mean that there aren't other considerations. And you don't just need to plead guilty. And then we had a row of parents get up, and we were able to get, I recall one case in particular where a child had been bullied and beaten and suffered actually some brain damage. It was not going to school. And we were able to present that to the judge, and that case was dismissed on the spot. And so there are incidents like that, but there are several factors to be considered. One is bullying and self-defense. Mm-hmm. If a child is suffering from homelessness, a part of foster care system. But there are things that parents want to advise their child about, such as if there has been an incident at school, do not voluntarily sign a written statement.
The student should not.
The students should not. And they should ask that the vice principal call their parents and wait until their parents are available to speak with the school with them. Because what happens is we have a lot of incidents at school that turn into court cases. And so those statements, those kinds of things that happen, they end up being used against your child in the juvenile court system, whether it's the justice of the peace court, the municipal court, or the district courts. And that's the part that we have a lot of concern about, is that entry from what we call the school to prison pipeline. And so we try to disrupt that through advocacy. We have a project called Safe and Supportive Schools Collaboration. We're the lead organization, but we're working with other organizations around Houston. For example, Disability Rights Texas. If you have a child that has a disability, they have certain procedural steps that have to be followed before your child can be disciplined. We work with Mental Health America. We work with Texas Appleseed, and we try to make changes that are going to impact a number of students and not just that individual student. But we also have an attorney to represent the students. Which
is very important. And we want to make it clear for people who might be watching this, maybe you don't have children or it's been a long time ago that you've had children, that the research and sort of the reason that this is so important is that in some communities and in some populations where, you know, these students might get off on the wrong foot with a teacher, or you don't know what happens. We're not just talking about, you know, we're not talking about student that brings a gun to school and they shouldn't be disciplined. We're talking about instances where you're starting what, you know, might be for one child just going to the principal's office. This isn't that. This is turning into a criminal record for something that could have been handled in a much different way.
Yes, and we actually did a report with the national organization last year to create a model law to be promoted on the federal level through Congress, to try to have states adopt laws similar to what we proposed, which was a different way for handling drug-related offenses. Because that's a good example of where you have, in the same community, different students, and unfortunately it falls along the color line, where you have students of color who are disciplined more harshly and may be sent to the police, and where you have other students in typically wealthier school districts and communities where they get treatment, they get counseling.
And consideration, and who your parents are, or who you know, right.
And that's the part that we're able to bring in our legal expertise, as well as trying to change the system. And in 2013, we worked with a number of organizations, and prior to 2013, there were about 270,000 school misdemeanor cases filed against kids. After that, it went down to 60,000.
Oh, wow.
So there are things that can be done, and we like to hear people's stories, because those stories are what create change. And so if you have a story to tell us, and we get that through our cases when people apply for help, but just if you want to call us and say, you know, this is not right, we want to help that one person, but we also want to help a large swath of our community.
Right. I want to continue the conversation. We are touching on some of those other issues we mentioned at the very top of this segment, but we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to know sort of the 1, 2, 3 things that you should do when you find out that your kid's been called into the office, or before then, that you should tell your child. And then at what point would parents call you? Do they think they need to pull you in? We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back answering those questions. Welcome back to this episode of Ask Amy. Our guest today is Sarah Guidry, the Executive Director of the Earl Carl Institute out of TSU's Thurgood Marshall School of Law. We've been talking about just one of the small pieces of things that you guys do, one of your projects, and it's helping parents and get advice on what to do if your child is being disciplined or has been called into the office. And we said we're going to give people sort of some practical advice, things they need to know. The first thing that you said during our break was be involved in your child's school. So that the first time you're not being involved is when something happens, or if something happens?
Exactly. And if you're involved, it's more likely that school will contact you when something happens, or contact you when they see that there may be something problematic that may occur. And involvement is the most important thing.
Yeah. We went over the first thing you said, if your child does get called into the office, to tell your child don't sign off, don't sign any statements, don't sign anything without first talking to your parents?
Don't write any statements. Don't make any
Why?
statements. Because the school discipline often goes hand in hand with referrals to the criminal justice system. And so it's just like we tell anyone, you know, when you start talking to the police, you need to be very cautious. You may feel like, I don't have anything to hide, but, you know, children are children. And I would advise my child not to say anything that could potentially end up as criminal. We have children who have disabilities that may affect their ability to explain themselves. We're pushing to see if we can change the law here in Texas so that kids under a certain age can't be interviewed if there's a potential criminal case because of their cognitive abilities. So the biggest problem with exclusionary discipline is that it often leads into the juvenile system, which often leads into, well, it often leads into placement in alternative placements. Alternative placements are schools where you have children who have had behavioral issues at school, and they're sent there, and so there's not a lot of teaching and supports the same way they would have at their
Regular
home school,
campus,
right?
yeah.
And they can be sit there for an extended period of time, so that it impacts their academics. And about 60% of students who get sent to alternative placement drop out of school. 80% of the prison population in Texas did not have high school diplomas. And so if we don't stop the practice of exclusionary discipline or reduce it, or if you don't fight back against it on behalf of your child, then the future for your child is very bleak.
So then what does that look like, fighting back against it for my child, being an advocate for my child, but also...
Being an advocate for your child, but also understanding what your rights are. On our website that we have for Safe and Supportive Schools, it's safeandsupportiveschools.tx.org. There's a Know Your Right brochure, and it has some provisions from the Chapter 37 of the Education Code, which applies to how schools apply exclusionary discipline, which is in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, placement, alternative placement, or expulsion.
And two of the things that we wanted to mention here from that brochure, where you can read the full thing, is that your child is only allowed to be suspended for out of school for a maximum of 3 days. I did not know that. I guess because if they want to discipline them more, they just send them to an alternative campus.
Yes.
And if your child is in 3rd grade or younger, they can't be suspended.
2nd grade or younger.
2nd grade or younger.
They can't be suspended until, or any kind of exclusionary discipline.
And okay, and that's part of the Texas Education Code.
Yeah, until 3rd grade.
Okay, all right. Very practical advice that we will link in the show notes here. So we said that you guys have all of these different programs. We're going to cover property rights and issues in our last segment, but tell me about some of the other things. I mean, the Innocence Project is huge, and people feel like they've heard of the project, but probably don't know exactly how it works. You guys get a lot of requests for help on cases that would not qualify?
We do. We get a lot of requests and calls for cases that don't qualify, but there are a lot of cases where people are asking for help, where they have met the general qualifications, which is for a claim to be actual innocence, you have to have been convicted. So if they're in the Harris County Jail, they have not been convicted, or they've recently been convicted and they're sitting time there, that won't qualify because you have to have been convicted and going through all of the appellate processes.
So really, you're at the end, you've tried to defend yourself in court and you lost, you were convicted, and now you're either in prison or you're going, whatever, your punishment is starting.
Right.
They would qualify.
But after they have taken up all their appeals. So, you know, you have the right to appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeals here. And then after that, when there's really no other legal procedures available, then the criteria is that there was no crime. Someone else committed the crime, and now we have new evidence to prove it.
Okay.
So a lot of cases are resolved based on DNA evidence, and we're all familiar with that, because that shows someone else committed the crime, and we have new evidence. But with DNA being used more routinely, the cases that we're getting now, we're investigating for witnesses. We're investigating for other types of forensics. Maybe something, can we track down some evidence now that was not tested? We get...
How many of those projects are you guys working on at any one time? Do you just take one and focus on that before moving on to another?
No, we're working on multiple cases at any given time, but we have hundreds of cases that are waiting to be reviewed, and that we're, but right now we have 5 really great potential cases that are just about ready to be filed. But the investigation for actual innocence takes years.
Yeah. Are these cases local cases or from all over the country?
All over Texas.
All over Texas.
And our students assist with finding evidence. We have one case that we're about to file that was investigated by students at Princeton, and they're working with us. We're doing the legal portion here in Texas. So we like to collaborate when we can. But investigations take a long time, tracking down evidence. But it's I can't even say it's heartbreaking. It's I can't think of the right word for it. But when you meet people who have been locked up, and many people have been locked up and placed in solitary confinement because they're so frustrated, they're innocent. And so their spirits have been broken. And it's difficult coming back and experiencing the world that may have changed 15, 20 years later.
Right. For help, if for a loved one, or if you know someone who needs help for the Innocence Project, or if any of the other issues that we're talking here, we're going to put this in our notes, but the Earl Carl Institute.org, you can go there and then see all of these different programs, and they have different phone numbers and websites, links where you can click to find out how to apply and see if you can get some help from the Earl Carl Institute. Thank you so much for joining us. When we come back, we're going to talk with another guest from the Earl Carl Institute talking about property rights and things that you need to know and do to keep your property in your family, if that makes sense. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Ask Amy. We've switched guests. This is Kelly Austin. You are the director for the Center for Civil Advocacy out of TSU. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, and thank you for having me as well.
Yeah, so your expertise, the reason that we wanted to bring you in, is talking about property issues that we see in communities all over the greater Houston area, probably all over the country. But I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, the biggest challenges and biggest problems that you're able to help people with.
Most of the people that come to us with inherited property issues, and that is because they've inherited some property from a loved one and never bothered to clear the title to bring it to the current generation. And they figure out that that's a problem when they need assistance, maybe after a hurricane and they're trying to get FEMA assistance, or they're trying to participate in the Houston Rebuild program, something that is going to require them to prove that they have the right to operate and encumber this property, but they can't do it because they don't have legal title.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many families, homes, people you know who have lived in the same home for, you know, their grandparents lived there, then their parents lived there, raised their kids, and then when parents pass on, they're there, but they've never gone and done any of this paperwork. Why? Is it hard to change it over?
It's not hard to change it over, but people a lot of times just don't see really a need to do it. There's lots of self-help tools that people can use to change it over themselves. TexasLawHelp.org is a great resource. It's an interview format where people can go on. It takes them through the interview, and then at the end, it will spit out the estate planning documents that you need in order to transfer your property and to secure your property and pass that generational wealth on. So it's not difficult to do. People just oftentimes don't do it.
Right. And you mentioned, so the Texas Law Help, and we've told our viewers about that before, when you're thinking about any sort of DIY sort of, I know I need to do this, it's sort of a legal form, but I don't want to hire an attorney.
Yes.
And that website is very helpful. You mentioned a transfer on death deed.
Yes.
What is that?
So one of the things that our program focuses on is keeping people out of probate court, and that's because you have to have an attorney to be in probate court. It's very expensive, so if you can avoid that process, we want to definitely help you to do that. One of the ways that you can do that is through a transfer on death deed, and that is a document that an owner would fill out while they are alive. They would file it into the real property records, designating who it is that they want to become the owners of their property after they pass on. And then once that person has passed, there's an affidavit that is completed by the heir. The heir would file that affidavit into the real property records, and that title would transfer. So you don't need to go to probate. You don't need to do anything else. And it's the easiest way to transfer title to real property.
Okay. Question, if there are 3 adult children and the living parent wants to take care of this before they pass and they go to fill out this transfer on death deed, they have to pick one of those children, or can they say transfer, split 3 ways, almost as if you do in a will?
You can split it 3 ways. You definitely can do that. Fractured ownership brings its own problems, so we don't always recommend that people do that. But if you wanted to do that, it's certainly something that is an option and you can accomplish with the transfer on death deed document.
I mean, this makes so much sense because talking with people who, most people, I don't know if there are statistics that you know of how many people actually do a will, who own a home or own any sort of property and take the time to go have a will made out. I would think that most middle-class Americans just don't take that step.
It's true, and one of the things that we say in our office is don't be so busy living that you are not prepared to die. And we do that through our estate planning clinics that we put on through our office. If someone doesn't want to go through Texas Law Help at different points during the year, we do have estate planning clinics where we provide free assistance for people to do those documents, to complete their wills, to complete medical powers of attorney, statutory durable powers of attorney. We help with the transfer on death deeds. We will help with documents that will help with minor children, designating a guardian before you have a need for yourself and for your children. So we will put together an entire estate planning packet for people so that they will have them before they actually need those things.
Oh, wow. And you could get all of those things done at one of these estate planning clinics?
Yes, you can.
Wow, that is very helpful. We will make sure that whenever you're doing one of those or you know of one of those that you guys are participating in, that we can share that information with our viewers. So getting back to I know that it's important any time of year, but you said one of the main reasons why it's important to get the home that you're living in your name, if you really are the person living there and it belongs to you, you've just never bothered to transfer it, is hurricane season's coming up.
Yes.
I know it's important all the time, but I also encountered this with some viewers who called me who were living in a home. They apply for FEMA or they apply for some sort of assistance after their home is damaged.
Yes.
And these agencies are not able to work on your home or provide assistance if it's not in your name.
That's correct. The title has to be in the name of the person requesting the assistance. And so if there is a person living in some airship property, it is imperative that they go ahead and bring that title to the current generation before hurricane season because we don't want you to find yourself in a position where you need help and your hands are tied. And it's a lengthy process because there's often deadlines in applying for that FEMA assistance, and you don't want to waste time exhausting your deadline because you're trying to clear your title.
Right. Very important information. Again, it's the earlcarlinstitute.org. When you go there, you can see all of these different topics and things that you guys cover, and then you can find exactly what you need help with to apply. There is an income eligibility for some of the programs.
Yes, there is.
So you'll see that, they'll apply, they'll let you know their situation, and you can see what assistance you're able to give.
Absolutely. The majority of our programs are tied to the federal income poverty guidelines, and our limit is 125% of poverty. And just to give you a perspective, that's like $35,000 for a family of 4. So it is people who have a really extreme need. We do have some programs that go up to 300% of poverty. Mm-hmm. Some of the projects outside of civil advocacy don't have any income guidelines, but the property projects do have those income guidelines. So it is definitely for people who have a very, very extreme need that we're able to help.
All right. It's great learning more about the Earl Carl Institute, and I appreciate you for coming on and talking with us today. We hope that you've learned something. Refer to the show notes if you have any questions about anything that we mentioned here, and have a great day.